Hey seniors, today we're going to be doing real-world situation graphs. So very often real-world situations are going to be represented on graphs and you have to break them down to figure out what they mean. Go ahead and write our title at the top of your notes page, and then there are some steps we're going to look for in order to match graphs to descriptions. The first thing you're going to look for is to identify variables first. What are you comparing? The second thing you need to do is to pay attention to slope. Is my slope increasing or decreasing? And lastly, you're going to look for places where the graph is constant, which is going to show a straight line, or varying, which is a curvy line, which will often mean someone is starting or stopping, and then speeding up or slowing down. This is going to make much more sense when we move on to examples, but make sure you have these first 3 steps written down in your notes page. Okay, guys. Let's go ahead and look at this example. What I want you guys to do is roughly draw these graphs. It doesn't have to be anything special or beautiful. Just roughly draw them, and then we're going to match these numbers with our graphs. So let's go ahead and look at our graphs first. Graph A has an increasing slope. Graph B has a decreasing slope. Graph C has a constant slope, or a constant. My line is constant throughout. D has an increasing line, and E has a decreasing line. So let's go ahead and read the very first one and try and match it. All right, so number 1, the car's speed remains constant. Constant means that it's not changing at all. So what I'm looking for here is the graph with a line that doesn't have a slope. And if I look at graph C, this graph does not have a slope. So answer choice number 1, the graph matching there is C. All right. Number 2, the car's speed increases slowly but steadily. Okay. I really want to focus on that word increases. If it increases, that means that my slope is going to be positive. So I can immediately eliminate all the answer choices that have slopes that are decreasing. So B, D, and E I can eliminate. B and E I can eliminate because they have slopes that are decreasing. That's going to leave me with graph D and graph A. Now, if it says it increases slowly but steadily, I'm looking for a graph whichever graph does not have the sharpest slope. And that's going to end up being graph D because the slope is increasing, but it's not at a very fast rate, which is why the slope isn't very steep. Okay, let's try number 3. The car's speed increases sharply. Now, I can go ahead and find the graphs that have slopes that are increasing because it says it increases. And the only graph left for that is graph A, which makes sense that it matches because if this car speed is increasing sharply, my slope is going to be very, very steep. All right, lastly, number 4, the car speed decreases gradually. Now, gradually means it's not decreasing at a very fast rate. It means it's decreasing, but it's decreasing slowly. So I'm looking for the graph that has a negative slope with a small slope, it has a negative slope, but is also decreasing at a slow rate. And that's going to end up being graph B, because between B and graph E, graph B has a line with a slope that is not decreasing at a fast rate. And then lastly, number 5, the car speed decreases suddenly. That's going to leave me with graph E, because that is the only one left, and also because it's a negative slope with a very sharp slope, which means it's decreasing suddenly. Make sure you have those examples written down on your notes page. Let's move on. Okay, guys, go ahead and draw this graph very roughly on your page. We're going to try to break it down a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and read it for you. An echo sounder was used to measure the depth of the ocean as the boat traveled over the water. The graph below shows the depths of the ocean in feet over the distance traveled in miles. So I'm comparing depth to distance traveled. Now, based on the graph, which statement about the ocean's depth is true? So let's go ahead and look and see what this graph is actually showing us. I know that it's representing depth over distance traveled, which means as you go across the ocean, in certain parts, it's going to be deeper than in others. For example, here, my line starts off with a relatively deep point in the ocean, but as we continue to travel, this little dip here shows that the water is getting shallow. As I continue to travel, the water is continually getting deeper, which is why the slope is increasing. And then as I travel again, it looks like my depth is decreasing. So let's go ahead and read our answer choices. Based on the graph, which statement about the ocean's depth is true? All right. So let's go ahead and look. The depth of the ocean increased at a constant rate until the middle of the distance and then decreased at a constant rate. That could be true because if I look at my line here, it looks like my slope is increasing at a relatively constant rate until we get to the middle, where all of a sudden we have this huge jump, and then it decreases at a relatively constant rate. So I'm going to go ahead and say answer choice A is a possible answer choice, but let's go ahead and read the rest of them. The depth of the ocean decreased at a constant rate until the middle of the distance, then increased at a constant rate. That can't be true because it says that it decreased at a constant rate until the middle and then increased. If I were to draw that graph, it would look something like this. If I'm decreasing at a constant rate until the middle, and then all of a sudden I increase, my graph would look more like that, which isn't what our graph looks like. So answer choice B cannot be correct. I'm going to cross it out. All right, let's read answer choice C. The depth of the ocean generally decreased until a certain point at which the depth began to increase until the end of the trip. Again, if I were to draw that, if it says it generally decreased, my graph would start out decreasing and then would all of a sudden increase. So it looks something like that. So since that doesn't match our graph, answer choice C cannot be correct. All right. Let's go ahead and read answer choice D. The depth of the ocean generally increased until a certain point, at which point the depth began to decrease until the end of the trip. All right. This is going to end up being our answer because it says it generally increased until a certain point, at which point the depth began to decrease until the end of the trip. The reason that answer choice D is going to be better than A is because my line here is actually not going at a constant rate. If it was a constant rate, the line would be straight and the hump would be here and then it would come down. So since answer choice D says that it generally increased, generally means that for the most part it's increasing, which works better for our line. Let's go ahead and do another example. All right, very quickly, let's do this one. A bug travels up a tree from the ground over a 30-second interval. It travels fast at first and then slows down. It stops for 10 seconds, then proceeds slowly, speeding up as it goes. All right, so the first thing I'm looking for is that it travels fast at first, which means I'm going to look for a line that's increasing immediately, and then slows down and stops for 10 seconds and then proceeds slowly, speeding up as it goes. So what I want to figure out is which ones I can eliminate. I can go ahead and eliminate my third graph here because it just shows decreasing at a constant rate. I can also eliminate the last answer choice because it shows us decreasing at a general rate. That leaves me with A and B. My first answer choice I can eliminate as well because it just increases at a constant rate, which leaves me with answer choice B, which shows a bug that travels relatively fast initially because my line is steep here, stops, and then walks slow for a little while and then decides to speed up, which matches our situation. All right, guys, that's going to be it for me. Let's go ahead and practice.